During the summer of 1940, the Luftwaffe pitted its entire strength against the Royal Air Force. As a prelude to the invasion, Goering had been given the task of destroying the RAF's capability in the south of England. It was essential that the Luftwaffe should have total command of the skies for the duration of the planned invasion. Goering was confident of a glorious victory. In July, the Luftwaffe outnumbered the RAF by 4-1. It was to be the world's first full-scale strategic air battle. It would also be the first time that the Luftwaffe had fought against an enemy air force of any strength and quality. The battle opened with 4 days of intensive daylight bombing of British shipping and coastal installations. The Luftwaffe lost 31 aircraft, 20 of them bombers. But crucially, the RAF had lost 16 Hurricanes and Spitfire fighters, whereas the Luftwaffe lost only 11 Bf-109 fighters. On the 12th of August, the Luftwaffe turned its attention to the initial radar installations. They lost another 11 fighters to the RAF's 22. It was a question of simple arithmetic. If the rate of attrition kept up like this, the RAF would lose. On the 13th, Goering made the first of what would be a series of blunders that would ultimately cause the Luftwaffe to lose the battle. Instead of pressing home the offensive against Fighter Command, bombers were dispatched to bomb cities as far apart as Swansea, Aberdeen, and Belfast. Attempting to safeguard the dispersed bomber streams, the Luftwaffe lost 24 fighters to the RAF's 14. Of more importance was the fact that no damage had been caused to Fighter Command's airfields. The effect of the offensive was also blunted by poor intelligence gathering. The wrong airfields and factories were targeted. As the battle progressed, the loss of British fighters was heavy, but the loss to the Luftwaffe was even heavier. On the 15th, 50 German aircraft were destroyed in one day. Between the 13th and the 18th of August, 350 German aircraft were lost to the RAF's 170. In this battle of plane against plane, the Stukas were virtually useless and were rapidly withdrawn from the battle. The Bf-109 alone had demonstrated the performance to fight the Spitfires and Hurricanes on equal terms, but there were severe logistical difficulties. The Achilles heel of the Bf-109 was the rate at which it consumed aviation fuel. By the time it reached the war zone in England, it normally had only 30 minutes of combat time left. The RAF had a further, less obvious advantage, in that any pilot who successfully bailed out of England eventually became a prisoner of war. RAF pilots who bailed out could be back to their base and flying again in the same day, and planes were easier to replace than trained pilots. On the 19th of August, Goering directed that all efforts should be concentrated on the fighter airfields, but incredibly, not the radar stations, which were giving the British a vital edge in the battle. Nevertheless, the new Luftwaffe strategy was partially effective, and as losses grew, the number of operational RAF fighters dwindled. The British factories were able to keep pace with the losses in aircraft, but there were now not enough pilots to fly them. One by one, the fighter stations were being damaged to the point where they could scarcely operate. By the end of August, the RAF had no more than 350 fighters operational, and to keep going, the pilots were flying up to 4 sorties every day. It would only be a matter of time before the final defeat. It is often some small event which by chance turns the tide of battle. On the 24th of August, some Luftwaffe bombers mistakenly overshot their target and dropped their bombs on London. The British retaliated the following day, and on several days following. Astonished Berliners found their own city under attack. An outraged Hitler vowed revenge, and Goering was directed to bomb London. The Luftwaffe, which was on the verge of a decisive victory against the RAF fighters, had no choice but to let the opportunity slip away. Air Chief Marshal Dowding's exhausted and depleted force was given the breathing space it needed to repair its airfields and to build up its fighter strength. Like a sponge, London could absorb the punishment that the German bombers inflicted, but the Luftwaffe losses spiraled. Throughout September, improved tactics and training gave the advantage to the Hurricanes and Spitfires over the Bf-109. The Hurricane, responsible for most of the RAF kills during the Battle of Britain, still looks able to perform as the stable gun platform that it was in World War II. Most famous of all British aircraft, and still spoken of today as the definitive RAF fighter of the World Wars, the Supermarine Spitfire. Faced with the tangible supremacy of the RAF, Hitler had no alternative but to postpone the invasion until the following year. For Göring, it was total humiliation. His catalogue of tactical errors had cost the Luftwaffe dear, but he berated everyone except himself.